Hi everybody, this is Lisa from Tilted Treats, and I'm continuing on with our project. If you remember, we did this sheet at the beginning, and here's my other initial drawing. I was kind of playing around with the idea that I wanted to put a tailpipe in this area where there's going to be naked cookie. I had really liked the sharp angle here of the fender and kind of wanted to keep that, but I'm not a fan of naked cookie chunks. So I thought that a tailpipe, a silver tailpipe there might be cool, but we'll see. So this is actually the next step that I do when I haven't done a cookie before, is I actually draw it out. So I wanted to show you guys real quickly though, there was some conversation on some of the boards about what the bottom of your cookies look like. I bake mine on Silpat sheets. This is the top of the cookie and this is the bottom. So I don't like any, if maybe just a hair of the golden brown at all. That's just my preference for a cookie, but since I had it here handy, I thought that I would show it to you. So here's my cookie, and this is a food coloring marker. I would normally probably use yellow, but that would be really difficult for you guys to try to see, so I'm going to go ahead and use brown. I think it'll be okay since most of it will be covered. So if one of the things that we had talked about, let me see if I can do this. One of the things that we had talked about is that we are going to have a little naked section up here at the handlebars. And we've got a little bit of a slope, so I want to start by recreating that. So I'm going to go off of here and then stick the handlebar right about like that, and that section there is going to end up being naked cookie. Okay, so I think the next thing that I'm going to do is come over here and try to do something with the headlight. And now I really want to get these tires filled in because I want to bring my front panels, that I'm actually going to do these in sections, into the middle here, and I need to know how much room I have around them. So for tires, I kind of just take round things to see what I have that's similar in size so that I can keep a good angle. That's not quite. That's a little too much. That's not working either. I probably should have just gotten a round cookie cutter. Give me a second, I'll be right back. Sorry about that. I got a little round set of cookie cutters where it has a bunch of these, and I think it goes up to 3.5 inches. They sure are handy. I think that's actually is going to be square on. I'll try the smaller one. So I just want to be really careful and make sure that I get the round there. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is I need to simulate this angle. So I want to leave enough room for my tailpipe, so I'm going to come in here and then come down to about the middle of the tire, which is where that is. And then I believe that I can put a tailpipe here and here, leaving this tiny bit of a cookie naked and this tiny bit of cookie naked, and I think that'll be okay. So I was going to do a seat, so I'm going to draw that in at about like that. And then down from the seat, I'm coming around here. And I actually want to make it look like a step, so I am going to come off on this area. And then here I want to do this front angle. Try to keep it like so. So what we're going to do is this section here in black, we're going to flood this area in green and bring it all the way down to here. Then we're going to come back and do this area in green and this area in green. This is going to be a headlight and a seat and a tailpipe. We're going to do those in white, and we'll come back in and paint those just so we don't have to make brown, silver, and yellow. And then I guess the next thing we want to do is put a little circle in there. So I'm just making a slight indentation into the cookie, just enough, with an icing tip so I can see it to get that circle. Okay, so I'll actually keep this one, and this will be the very last one that I'll do. This is going to be my reference so that I will be able to do the rest and hopefully successfully complete them. If you were with me earlier, I made the orange for the basketballs, and then also the dark green. They have darkened both of them a little over time. And I actually also found this really cool netting that I'm going to spray paint brown over the flooded basketballs just to give it a little bit of texture. And I think that's going to be really neat look to give it some texture. So we'll move this out of the way. I actually work with a piece of shelf liner, and then I have my little turntable and it keeps it steady, and then I put another little piece of shelf liner on top of it. It just helps me spin things around. So we'll go simple first and flood the basketballs just to get them set up and drying and out of the way. If you remember that I told you that I leave a little room so that I can massage. I just stuffed these this evening, but a little bit of massage isn't going to hurt anything. And the reason I leave the room is because when I'm no longer using it, I like to squish the icing down like this and fold the tip over on itself, and that just helps it store. So I'm using a tipless bag, and I'm going to cut it here. Since it's a 3.5 inch cookie, I want a pretty good flow on it. I want to be able to have time to get it to work. So I'm just going to cut it with the seam in the middle. Just going to cut it straight across. Okay, so again, I'm not holding the whole entire bag in my hand. I'm actually resting it over. And I'm only holding what I can comfortably hold in my hand. I'm not going all the way to the outside. I'm going to do that with my scribe. I believe I read that you're supposed to scribe in a clockwise direction. I don't know that it matters. I say scribe wherever you feel comfortable scribing. Got a little bit of icing close to the edge there, a little too close. So I'm just scooching that back into the middle of the cookie. Doing a little all over thing. There's a little area that wants to get excited and run off. Too much there, so I'm just going to clean that right off. And I'm just touching the wet icing to kind of make the moisture come to the surface, and it'll get those little areas that were just barely starting to crust. Tapping it a couple times, looking for any other air bubbles that might pop to the surface. I don't see anything. Oops. Maybe a little something there. Okay, off to the next one. When you're flooding, you should try to hold your tip or tipless edge of your bag down close to the cookie. That helps prevent air bubbles from getting trapped in it. Some people are very meticulous about outlining perfectly and then going back and filling it in, which is fine. You just need to experiment for yourself. I personally have tested it and have found that I can be quicker to do a little less careful on the outlining and just come back with my scribe and clean the edges up. Sorry. I keep forgetting that I'm videoing and I should probably be saying something, but I'm a pretty quiet worker, so I get involved in what I'm doing. I saw some recent online pictures of basketballs where people have actually gone in and made hundreds of teeny tiny little dots to texture the basketballs, and man, they sure are pretty, but that is amazingly time consuming. I don't know if I have the patience to do that. So I'm really excited to try with the netting. I think that's going to give us a real nice look to it. So again, I just kind of do a rough outline, and then I like to scribe to the edge. For me, that's quicker and more accurate. I'm using the same consistency icing. It was about a 12 to a 13 second. And I'm just scribing around looking for any air bubbles. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so I'll show you here what I do is I just squeeze a little bit of icing out of the tip, and then once I have that, I squeeze the icing back up in the bag and then fold it over, and that's how I store the icing until I need it again. So since we're going to a new color, I'm going to go ahead and get a fresh paper towel. So I've got my little template here and my cookie here. So I want to make sure that I keep the angles on these wheels. I'm going to go ahead and draw those off on the other cookies. I may go ahead and sketch in the other parts. Off on this wheel somehow, so let me see if I can get back and fix that. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing with my green. I'm just going to cut this tip a little smaller. And I'm going to actually do some sections here. So I want to come in underneath the seat. And I'm just giving it a little more pressure for a little more flow. Okay, I'm going to do that section, and I'm going to do this section and let that set up, and then come back in and do this other larger green section that is going to give me some dimension. So now that I have the area filled, I'm just going to take the scribe and make sure the icing is going to where I want it to go. Okay, that looks great. So I'm just going to do the same thing, following those lines to do those outer edges. And then I'm going to come back with my scribe and move them over to where I want them to be. I'm still using a tipless bag. I find that I really like tipless bags. One, you can cut the tip to basically any size you need. Two, regardless of how big or small you've cut the tip, you can apply a little more pressure and get a little more flow, which is handy when you're filling in an area but you want a smaller outline. I do still use tips on occasion, but particularly for writing where I want to have a little more exact control. But I usually use tipless bags in tipped bags whenever I'm doing that. And I believe I've shown that on another video, but we will do it here. We are also making plaques. And so we'll have some writing to do. So I'm doing the two edges. I could have done the middle first and then that would have only been one section, but I'm doing the two edges. You just don't want to do anything that's touching each other. That way the icing has an opportunity to really set up. Some people have asked me how I got started into cookies. Actually, it was a crazy story. I was taking some quilting classes on Craftsy. I do a lot of different crafts. I sew and quilt, I crochet, I knit, I tat, do some scrapbooking, I do some quilling, which is a paper craft. I like to do those sorts of things. I cross stitch, embroider. And Craftsy, based on the types of things that I was searching, the classes that I was taking, my participation in some of the groups, presented me with a cookie decorating class, and it said, "We think you might like this." And I saw it and I thought, hey, that looks like a lot of fun. And so I took one of the classes and I really did. I liked it a lot. So I'm going to very lightly, oh yeah. So this is one of the fantastic things about frankenfrosting, is that it crusts pretty quickly. And although this is spotlessly dry, it is crusted enough that my colors are not going to bleed if I go on to the next color. So even by just doing the 4 that we've done here, I'm going to be able to go in and do it. So initially I was going to leave this little area open, but I decided that I didn't like that, so I definitely want to fill this in as our seat. But I'm going to go back and do the rest of the screen. So I've barely given any pressure to the outside of the bag, and I've got a relatively small hole, probably I would say maybe a 1.5 to a 2. And then once I get that outline going, I was able to squeeze it a little harder and get a little more flow going so that I was able to fill it a little faster. So when you're scribing with something that is super soft, like this that we just did, you want to be really careful that you don't accidentally poke it, because then that'll get it to bleed together. So one of the things that I'm also going to do, we'll take some petal dust and go in here and increase the shading even more. But it looks like that's setting up nicely, so I think that's going to work fine. So I'm just barely applying any pressure so that I get a nice thin outline. And then once I have that, I'm going to squeeze a little harder. To get the icing to flow out a little quicker. And then take my scribe and fill in any of the areas. Get out to the edge if I didn't get exactly to the edge. As we were talking about crafting, this has been one of the most enjoyable things that I've done about cookies, is that it often comes together like other craft projects. actually learned to crochet and knit and embroider when I was very young. I was taught by a little old lady who lived in an area that was a friend of my mom's. Her name was Mrs. Nichols. She lived in Port Republic, and she never had any formal education. At least that I may remember, the reason that she crocheted and knitted and sewed and quilted is because they made their own clothes. They needed to make things to keep them warm, and that's what they did. She lived on a farm. They butchered, they grew their own garden, they canned. And what I remember most about her is that she was born in 1910. And she gave me a little booklet that had basic knitting and crocheting and embroidery and tatting stitches in them. That was printed, I believe, in 1948, and I actually still have that. We used to go down to visit Mrs. Nichols maybe once a week or so, and I used to always enjoy it because she would always show me new stitches or new things to do. She had always said that she wanted to learn to embroider and tat, but she was never very good at it. And she said that that was something that I guess rich people, wealthy people, people more well-to-do learned how to do, because that was considered frilly and an adornment. That when you knitted gloves because you needed to keep your hands warm, not because you necessarily wanted something pretty. And embroidery and tatting were something that was considered pretty. So she sewed and made things out of necessity, not because she was looking to dress something up. Okay, so I'm going to squeeze my green back down. Fold that over. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is come back here, and I'm going to do the insides of my tires. I'm using a thick consistency icing for this, and I have a really large tip. It wouldn't have to be. I just happened to be using this a minute ago for another project. And I just want to make sure that I completely fill up that circle and smooth that around. I believe I'll probably go back and paint that silver at some point. because it's pretty thick icing, it kind of leaves that little Hershey's Kiss there, which if you just stick your scribe in it and swirl it around, the moisture of the icing blob below will suck that up. For super small areas like this, you should use a thicker icing anyway. It just helps prevent it from cratering, or attempt to prevent it from cratering. I don't know that there's necessarily a foolproof way to prevent craters that's 100% accurate every single time. I had bunny rabbits that I did this week that I used a super thick pink for the nose, and I still had about half of the crater. We'll call it adding character. Okay, so this is actually an example of a tipless bag and a tipped bag, and I do like to do this because it allows me to change things in and out. For example, I'm taking off this 12 and putting on a 3 because the Franken frosting is doing an excellent job this evening, and it may also be the lights. I'm going to go ahead and pipe in my headlight, and again, because it's a small area, I'm using a thicker icing. I am using white, and the reason being is I didn't want to have to make yellow just for a little tiny headlight, so I'm going to come back and paint him yellow. So I'm just forming him the way that I want to form him. I'm going to do the same thing for the tailpipe. We're actually going to come back in and do that in silver. I didn't make it actually 100% touch. Just add a little bit of dimension there, and then I'm going to do the same for the seat. If you watched the planning session, we decided that we were going to do this maybe brown. I could have done this with the orange, probably, and then just paint it over with the brown, but since I've got the white, I'll just do it this way. And you know what? While I'm here, I think I'm just going to go ahead and do the handlebars and paint them as well. Is that the official word for it, handlebars? Gosh, I don't know. Okay, so you can see that that's crusting up really nicely. It's giving me the dimension that I want. I will go in with like maybe a darker green or a brown and just really further accentuate those panels. I do want to let this dry good because the next thing that I'm going to do is add my black. When I add the black, I'm going to come back in and actually let it crust, and then take my boo-boo stick and smush it. Just to give a little bit of texture to the tires. I don't know of anything else that I can do at this point other than we need to let them dry. As always, if you guys have any questions on anything that you're seeing me do, or wondering why I'm doing it or how I'm doing it, or would like further explanation or comments, certainly shoot me a message or leave a comment underneath this video. I will certainly try to answer any questions. Two more. I would say then you don't have to listen to me talk anymore, but I've been pretty quiet. One of the things that really surprised me when I started messing with royal icing is a lot of people really fight it, and it can be a bear when you're not used to working with it. But you can actually get it to behave. Like, this is the thicker icing, and I'm just literally moving it to where I want it to sit. And then kind of scribing it so that it smooths itself out. I see a lot of new people say, you know, how can I get this icing, and what consistency do you use? And first off, everybody counts different. But it really is just an experiment. And then I've also found that what works for me may not work for you. But I've found that as I've gotten more proficient at it and more used to it, more adjusted to it, that instead of it having to be exact, where I was using a stopwatch initially to time my counts, I can now get into a range. So like where it was exactly at 12 or 15 seconds, I can now go 10 to 20 seconds and get it to work the same. Not to say that there's not differences in it, of course there is, but as you get more used to working with it, your window opens a little further. So these are going to dry overnight. I'll do the tires in the morning and I will film that. And probably sometime tomorrow evening we'll do the airbrushing on the basketballs for the texture. And then we can add in the seams once that's completed. And I have a stencil that we'll use for that. I may, before I do the tires, actually paint this silver and this silver. Okay, so that's it for the evening. Thanks for watching, and I will hook up with you guys tomorrow.